Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher. Welcome to the Stream's online pre-show. Today we're extending both our pre- and post-show because we have so much to discuss with two very special guests, Islamic scholars Hamza, Yusuf, and Zaid, Shakir. Welcome to the pre-show, everyone. And Shaykh Hamza, thank you so much for being here.
All right, well, thank you for having me.
I want to start with talking a little bit about United for Change. Tell us what that's all about.
United for Change was an initiative of Imam Zaid to try to get an umbrella organization, get a lot of people together on different areas of focus. So in this one, it's about poverty. He's done other things, and I've participated as a guest, really.
Imam Zaid, you want to jump in on this with us?
Yes. United for Change was really conceived to bring, as Shaykh Hamza mentioned, many different scholars representing various fields of Islamic work in this country who might not ordinarily cooperate with each other to come together to address issues that are larger than any the resources or the scope or reach or any individual group. So we've done 4 of these. This is the 4th one. The first one dealt with the issue of malaria in Africa, and we were able to raise over $400,000 for the assisting anti-malaria work in Africa. The second one dealt with the family and focusing on issues that aren't usually dealt with, such as domestic violence, some of the problems that Muslim teenagers are facing, and other issues that sometimes fly under the radar. The third one was last year in Washington, D.C. We dealt with the issue of education. In that context, we focused on the mission and the unique effort of Zaytuna College. And this year, we're dealing with the issue of poverty, particularly poverty as it affects our inner city communities and what some of the Muslim communities in the inner city, particularly Masjid al-Islam in New Haven, Connecticut, are doing to address that issue.
So how is this initiative different from your work that you had started doing with Islamic Relief on malaria?
I think that work was focused on a single organization that's out there in the field. What we were trying to do was bringing the resources of the Muslim community to bear on that problem. So if Islamic Relief was really on the front line, we were trying to provide a stronger network of support behind the scenes to marshal particularly the financial resources of the Muslim community to help address the issue.
Shaykh Hamza, I want to shift gears there a little bit and talk about Occupy Wall Street. It's something that you've spoken out a lot about. What do you think some of the issues were in terms of how that movement went wrong?
Well, I think first of all, the language of the movement was problematic for me because the whole concept of occupying anything is problematic for me. And I think what it is it's engaging the quote-unquote enemy. I mean, here it's in a civil sense, but the quote-unquote enemy. So occupy is oppressive language? It's an oppressive language. I mean, I think for me it's really more let's abandon Wall Street. You know, let's look at different models. I think that for me, it's really about checking out of this system as much as we're possible and divesting. So I'm much more interested in educating people about how they can divest from the system. For instance, I personally, you know, I don't fly certain airlines because they get Fs in terms of their overall their social responsibility, their commitment. You can get the Better World Buying Guide and actually begin to buy ethically certified products, things like that. So I think people have to really stop empowering them by giving them your support. I mean, and that's a consciousness raising awareness that I'm much more interested in. I'm much more interested in looking at strategically how we can get out of this mess that we're in, because trying to occupy the mess is not going to do it for me. And the other thing I just would say also is that the 1%, the United States, we're 5%. The rest of the world's 95%. So everybody in America is engaged in some sense in helping support oppression, because for instance we buy chocolate in this country. Most of the chocolate is harvested by slave labor, the cocoa, and that's been well documented by CNN and many other things. So I don't eat chocolate unless it's fair trade certified, something like that. And these are the ethical commitments of the trials and tribulations of trying to live an ethical life in a very unethical world. And that's something I want to talk more about in the show, this idea of syncing up your values with the way you live your life every day. Imam Zaid, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Shaykh Hamza in terms of the names and things, but I think it's important for us to focus on the fact that some of the issues that the Occupy movement were raising are legitimate issues addressing income distribution and the growing gap between those who possess and those who are dispossessed, some of the structural issues that need to be addressed, and then the more recent effort to begin to link some of those concerns of Occupy Wall Street with Main Street, and to address the foreclosure issue and other issues. Those are valid concerns, but I would agree with Sheikh Hamza.
On that note, though, we're going to have to put it on pause, guys, because the pre-show is over, but we're about to start the stream in 10 seconds. Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, poverty, politics, and conflict. We put it all on the table with renowned Muslim American scholars Hamza Yusuf and Zaid Shakir. Following protests against an anti-Islam video, many have focused on negative depictions of Islam. Here at the stream, we've tried to broaden that global conversation this week by bringing you other perspectives. And today, we're continuing on that path with two prominent Muslim scholars. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is known as one of the world's most influential Muslims. In fact, he's been called a theological rock star, like the Elvis of Western Muslims. Imam Zaid Shakir served as a chaplain at Yale University and is co-founder, along with Sheikh Hamza, of Zaytuna College, which will soon be the first accredited Muslim college in the U.S. They're here to help us examine some tough issues facing the world today, and we want to start by looking at poverty. How does it take root, even in wealthy countries like the United States? Is government failing, or are individuals overly focused on consumerism? Of course, Anousheh Hossein is here grabbing all your live feedback, and members of our community are also with us on Google+. So let's jump right in. Sheikh Hamza, you and Imam Zaid are doing this initiative focusing on poverty. Why right now?
Well, I mean, globally, we're in a major crisis. I think in the United States, we're seeing economic conditions that haven't been around for a very long time. Poverty is always present. Like Jesus said, it's always with us. But right now, in particular, a lot of people are suffering. I know, for instance, the food banks are in crises in a lot of the inner cities and places where there are just so many people are needing help right now. And so it's an important issue. For me personally, though, I think a lot of what I see is so much not as against poverty, but elevating and dignifying poverty. I've lived in many countries. I've lived in one of the poorest countries in the world, in West Africa, and the people there are materially impoverished, but they're actually spiritually and in terms of their community, they're actually very rich. And so I think even our wealthy people in this country are often very impoverished in terms of their community, their lives. People are very stressed out. I mean, you can see it on the road. You can see it. Just look at the faces of the people out there. They don't look happy. You know, we're called Prozac nations. So I think limiting poverty to an income distribution problem, for me, it's a much broader issue. I mean, I would consider intellectual and spiritual impoverishment one of the major ones. Not to mention food, because poor people in a lot of countries eat much better than the wealthy people in the United States. They eat healthier food, better food. I mean, the average Indian, his dal is much more healthy than all of this fast food that's causing all these health problems here in the United States.
Fast food that's now spreading around the globe.
Right.
Go ahead. I want to pick up on the theme of wealth that you just mentioned. I'm going to go to our online community here for a second. I have a tweet from Maggie Carter. She says a lot of Muslims don't really want to have to educate people about themselves or Islam, but must work with community to counter disinformation. I also have a tweet here from Muslim IQ. He says the fact that the GOP has officially adopted an anti-Islam platform, that is horrifying as much as it is stupefying. I want to also quickly go over to our Google Hangout. Logan, you have a question for us about redistributing wealth?
I do. And since it's election season, there's been a lot of discussion in America about wealth redistribution and the safety net of welfare. Especially, we've been seeing this brand of conservatism that is hyper-individualism and hyper-capitalism. So I'm just curious what Sheikh Hamza and Imam Zaid have to say about what Islam has to say about redistributing wealth to those who are wealthy, to those who are poor. And is this actually being carried out in Muslim communities or in Muslim-majority countries?
Imam Zaid.
Yeah, I would first of all say that the Quran is very clear on this issue in the sense that it's trying to strike a balance between private ownership and respecting private ownership and personal initiative and honoring that, and on the other hand trying to prevent extreme differentials in terms of income distribution that renders some people impoverished in a basic standard of dignified living being met, even if those people might be considered poor. So it's very clear in the Quran that حتى لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم, that the wealth should not just circulate amongst the wealthy in a society. The wealthy have a right to their wealth, but if there are people in need and those people have been structurally prevented from earning a decent living, then it's a responsibility of the entire society to address that issue. And I think in that regards, there has to be a consciousness, a public moral consciousness that facilitates bringing those resources to bear. And the Islam emphasizes cultivating that consciousness. So if the questioner mentions this in a sense rabid individualism that builds on the philosophy of the likes of Ayn Rand, the Quran is saying we want to create a consciousness, a public moral consciousness that endorses selflessness and يعني ويؤثرون على أنفسهم ولو كان بهم خصاصة. They give preference to others even though they themselves have dire needs. So we need to cultivate a public moral consciousness that is amenable to sharing our wealth and also amenable to respecting the rights of those who have earned the wealth, so that we can have a more balanced view and a more balanced society. And that's what Islam is aiming for, a balance between extremes of extreme selfishness that would leave the poor even when they're structurally rendered poor. In other words, there's no fault of their own. That, for example, the farmer can no longer farm because organic seeds have been rendered extinct due to cross-pollination with GMOs, and they can only buy the seeds now from a corporation, and they don't have any money because they're locked out of the cash economy.
Well, another aspect of this, I mean, we were just teaching yesterday, we were discussing at Zaid College in the ethics class, book 5 of Aristotle, where he talks about distributive justice. So this was a problem that the ancient Greeks were dealing with. It's not something that goes away. But one of the things that he points out in there is magnificence. You know, the idea of actually people giving back to society. I mean, that was an ideal in their society, that wealthy people and the philanthropists in this culture, traditionally that's what they did. A lot of America was built. In fact, there's a program on, I think, on the History Channel now about the men who built America, about Vanderbilt and Rockefeller and all these different you know, philanthropists. And you have people like Bill Gates that are obviously trying to follow in those footsteps. Right. But this situation where you have, like Imam Zaid said, you have a structural situation that does not really allow for a certain segment of the population to get out of the poverty that they're in. So you have failed schools in the inner cities. I mean, these are issues that if they're not addressed, you destabilize the entire project. And so the wealthy people end up like in third world countries, where they have to live in sheltered environments with armed protection. And increasingly we're seeing this in the United States as people move into these, it's becoming like a third world country in that way, where people begin to move into gated communities where you get private corporate police, and it's unacceptable. A civil society, I mean, America was a very different culture 30 years ago.
And I'm
old enough to remember how it was.
That's what I wanted to get at, because, you know, Imam Zaid, I don't think anything that he's suggesting would be rejected by most faith-based communities. However, do you think that America has lost its faith?
Well, I think America
used to reflect this a lot more 50 or 60 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, faith was a much more fundamental component. I mean, if you look just in modern, you know, housing now that they build, they don't factor in churches anymore, or, you know, this isn't factored into the community anymore. So, I mean, we're definitely seeing America still has a lot of faith-based people, undeniably, but you're seeing that the faith community no longer has the type of impact that they had in the past. I mean, the Catholic Church was one of the major benefactors in the United States. So a lot of this has been either privatized or moved into government. So the whole entitlement project, you know, this idea that government has to do everything for the people. I mean, in some ways, it's actually had a profound impact on communities that used to do these things. Let me give you one example. When I was a kid, we had a house burnt down in the neighborhood. They went and collected buckets, and everybody pitched in to rebuild this person's house. That was fire insurance in the United States not that long ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of people, you know, we forget that insurance was actually just the community. If somebody was in hard times, other people would pitch in, and Frank Capra made a career in Hollywood making films about that aspect of America.
Yeah, I think though, I think in the past though, it was the case that not only the wealthier philanthropists who, you know, how they gained their money might have been questioned and challenged by some in terms of the immorality of their economic activity, but the ordinary person, the middle class, upper middle class, taxpayers gladly paid 90% of their excess wealth and saw it as an investment in the future.
Into the future.
And that's what built the public highway systems. That's what sent a man to the moon. That's what built the great public universities of this country. And I think
it's not a vision beyond oneself.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not ironic that as we move away, in a sense, as a society at least, from a richness of faith, regardless of our respective faith communities, and we begin to glorify atheism, atheistic ideologies, that we see the emergence of this individual selfishness, even though there are a lot of people who don't profess a faith who are very generous. But in general, though, we see a movement away from a spirit of selflessness, self-sacrifice, doing something for the greater glory of God in terms of public good, and a movement towards more rampant and sometimes rabid individualism.
I want to bring in our online community here for a second. I have a tweet from Michael Adroit. He says, why is it that Western Islamic followers are more willing to allow the existence of opinion or behavior not necessarily agreed with? I have another tweet here from Betsy D. She says, agree. It's always struck me as bizarre that an entire economic system is based on acquiring stuff. I'm going to quickly head over to our Google Hangout. We have Samir. He has a question to us about poverty. Samir, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, my question is that Muslims are so poor and so backward in many countries. For example, in a country like India, they even lack basic needs like education and housing. And yet we see so many Muslims collect money for building new mosques. Every Friday I go outside a mosque, I see them collect more money for building new mosques. I mean, there's no harm in building mosques, but at least use 10% of that money for education or hospitals. It will change so many lives.
Couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, it's no brainer.
Yeah,
no comment, you know, I mean, yeah, good point.
I think, though, the implication in that question, one of the assumptions is that somehow Muslims in this country who are trying to build their mosques and schools and other projects and other infrastructural projects rather, are not doing enough to assist Muslims in other countries, whereas there are Muslim countries that have billions of dollars in excess. And I think where that money's going, how that money's being used, Muslims might collect $100,000 to build a masjid in Peoria, Illinois, whereas a particular Muslim country might be spending $300 million to build a skyscraper that's not even going to be fully occupied. Yeah. So I think that question might be a little bit misdirected.
Well, Samir was coming to us from India,
yeah,
too.
I think he was talking
taking
about,
a personal
that's how
view.
I understood.
Yeah.
I thought he was talking about the Muslim lands, and I agree with him. I think the lack of focus on education, on especially the education of the Muslim community, but, you know, importantly also is the neglect of religious education, which has caused a lot of the climate that we're in, because we don't have really seriously trained Muslim intellectuals anymore that are conversant with their tradition, as well as being able to grapple grapple with the issues that we're dealing with now. And so we've got a lot of village preachers and people that could not get into other types of schools, and so they ended up going to religious schools. It's a very common phenomenon. And so unfortunately you get a lot of demagoguery, and you get a lot of shallow thinking, provincialism, and it causes an immense amount of problems. So I'm very committed to religious education for that reason, but that's not to neglect other components of education.
What are your concerns right now in terms of globally? It seems that this American liberal model of democracy is being blueprinted around the world.
Well, I think one of the things about in the West that we have an exceptionalist approach to ourselves. Before we were liberally democratic, we were a very Christian civilization, and we were attempting to thrust Christianity on the rest of the planet, believing that that was our divine sanctioned right to do that. So we sent missionaries all over the place, and this European colonialism, it was quote unquote to civilize all these savages and turn them into images of our religious self. Well, now that we're in a post-Christian era, suddenly it's liberal democracy, but I still feel that the impulse is the same impulse. It's the impulse of this kind of exceptionalism, this idea that somehow we're different in the West. We have Aristotle and Socrates, our foundations are rational, and the rest of the world, the Asians, these inscrutable people over in China and Indonesia, they don't really think the way we do. And then these savage Muslims, look at them. They can't even live civilly amongst each other. Even their religion is a violent, barbaric religion. So this is the type of narrative that is constantly projected. And unfortunately, a lot of Muslims and other peoples fall into these kind of ways of objecting to this imperialistic tendency that's very Western.
Imam Zaid, the narrative is certainly changing in the Middle East, much as a result of the Arab Spring. A lot of people attribute that to discontent with politics, but I know you and Shaykh Hamza think differently. Give us your perspective on that.
Can you be more specific? My perspective on what?
The reasons that the Arab Spring uprisings happened. A lot of people think it was political, and I know both of you have commented on it being more economic.
I think definitely economics are a factor. There are political motivations, economic motivations, there are social and cultural motivations, but I think a lot of it can be attributed to the general frustration that prevails, especially amongst the younger population who aren't seeing economic opportunities that they've been believed to be waiting for them once they finish their college education. I think Bouazizi was a college graduate, and he's selling vegetables. On the one hand, I think there's a failure of politics and economics, but there's also a failure of religion in the sense that one views one's state of contentment and peace of mind and one's ability to persevere and to patiently endure economic and political trials in the light of one's relationship with Almighty God, and find a sense of self-satisfaction, a sense of self-importance if one has a solid and meaningful and rich relationship with Almighty God. So I think when you bring these factors together, that frustration builds up because it's not mitigated by a rich relationship with God. And then you get into a fight and flight situation where under the proper stimulus, that stimulus might be Bouazizi's cart turned over and being slapped by a policewoman. That stimulus might be this the likes of this film that recently came out, and you get a fight or flight reaction, and sometimes where the rational faculties stop, and then you have an explosion, if you will. So I think it's very important for us to see the factors that are contributing to that frustration on the one hand, the factors that are not there to help mitigate it and construct and focus it in constructive avenues, and then to see what is constructive. In the Arab Spring, there's a lot that's constructive, there's a lot that could be criticized, but I think
I'm going to interrupt you for a second really quick and bring in our online community. I have a tweet here from Nawaz. She says, what do scholars think of the cultural, ethnic, and religious discrimination of Muslims in the West? Why are Muslims fair game? I also have a tweet here from Shabadil. He asks, Islamophobia being #1, we are not politically organized at all, and barely some of us vote. I also have a video question from one of our viewers. Have a look. Listen, Imam, I'd like you to answer this.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yasmina and I'm currently a student at the American University in Cairo. I have a question for both of the imams. Whether willingly or unwillingly, you've both become part of a response to racist depictions of Islam as inherently violent that presents Islam as inherently pacifist, specifically as compatible with Christian pacifism. And this is one of the main topics of a common word which you both signed. And so my question is this: do you worry that the fact that the Muslim community in the US has been forced to adopt such a defensive posture results in the spread of a distorted image of Islam that downplays Islam's very real prioritization of social action and resistance?
You know, just in response to that question, I mean, first of all, the earlier question about the depiction of the American Muslims and Islam overall. I mean, America's been at war in Muslim countries, and so this is a very common result of war. You tend to demonize your enemies, and there's people on the right that have done that very effectively. But on the other hand, it's also part of the enfranchisement of a community in America. Every community that's come here, with the exception of the Anglo-Saxon community, has had to duke it out literally on the streets of America. You know, the gangs of New York, the Italians, they used to be Dagos and Wops. You know, the Jews were Kikes, and you know, my own ancestors from Irish background were Mix. You know, and you had my wife's Mexican, so it's the Beaners and the Spicks. Right. I mean, this was part of the enfranchisement. And Muslims are fair game right now, and it's going to take a while, but they have to organize and do the things that other communities have done as part of a process. In terms of this, the last questioner, I mean, first of all, I don't think either Imam Zaid nor I have presented Islam as a pacifist religion, and Christianity is also not a pacifist religion.
Sounds like she's conflating peacefulness and pacifism.
Yeah, I think exactly, and I think resistance takes on many different forms, and part of the wisdom of any religious teaching is to use the most appropriate resistance in the given circumstances. Christians did not passively fight Hitler. They had preachers and ministers and rabbis as well that were arguing for a just war. Augustine is part of the Catholic Christian tradition and explains just war. So the Muslims do, you know, we do have a just war theory, and jihad is definitely part of Islam. But on the other hand, I think the aspect of Islam that has been sorely neglected is the Prophet ﷺ's basic and fundamental responses to oppression and persecution. They were responses when they were disempowered. His responses were to have patience. He was commanded to have patience. And this is something the Muslims view a lot of these verses to be abrogated. And I think this is one of the fundamental problems. Fakhruddin al-Razi, the great theologian, said that to say these verses are abrogated is to say that there's no ethics in Islam. I mean, just you throw out the ethics of our tradition. So I think a lot of Muslims are very confused about that and don't realize that one of the ways of resisting is actually to shame the oppressor when you're powerless.
Right. And I think it's important to that question to understand that you're there in Cairo. There's a lot of social activism going on here in the United States. The Muslims have been involved in the Occupy movement and also critiquing it, but not shunning it in terms of not being involved. This United for Change program is dedicated to addressing issues of poverty in the inner cities of our country here, and specifically in New Haven, Connecticut, Masjid al-Islam, that has a food pantry, that has a reentry program for prisoners, Muslim prisoners who are coming out of the prison and need to be reintegrated into society, that has it's trying to create a youth counseling program, that has programs to address issues that arise from poverty. So there's a lot that's happening, but I agree with Sheikh Hamza. Einstein's definition of stupidity was to continue to do the same thing and accept different responses. Yeah. We've had a response to the Rushdie crisis that people flood out into the streets, they yell and scream, and then the Danish Khartoum crisis, people flood out into the streets and yell and scream, and nothing changes. So I think we need to strategically begin to look at these issues and develop real meaningful solutions.
Yeah, just to dovetail on that, you know, Bernard Lewis said that Westerners tend to forget that the reason that they were so successful is that they learned how to kill people better than any other civilization prior to Western civilization. And so one of the things about Western civilization is they love violent responses because those are the responses that they're most effective at dealing with. And certainly the Israelis have learned very well. The Israelis were persecuted for 2,000 years in Western civilization, but they definitely internalized the oppressor's techniques for squelching any type of resistance.
Absolutely, and I think as Muslims in this day and age, there's 700 billion people on earth. There are 1.7 something billion Muslims. That's a clear minority globally, and here in the West, that minority is even smaller. Our strength is our moral and ethical strength, and we negate that strength sometimes by trying to build on the strength we don't have, and that's strategic strength. We don't have strategic strength. So I think
Zaid, I'm going to have to stop you there.
No problem.
We are going to put this conversation briefly on hold. Shaykh Hamza, Imam Zaid in the post show. We're going to continue this conversation. In fact, we're extending the post show today. It's streamed at aljazeera.com. Now on Monday, U.S. child obesity rates, they've tripled over the last 30 years. Will this generation of Americans be the first to live shorter lives than their parents? We're going to talk about that on Monday. Until then, see you online. Welcome back to the Stream's online post show. Joining us today, Shaykh Hamza, Yusuf, and Imam Zaid Shakir. We want to pick up our conversation not quite where we left off. I want to shift gears a little bit. For all of you who've been with us this week, you know one of the things that we've been talking about is the role of the media and how sometimes the media either chooses not to cover something or just completely misses it. Shaykh Hamza, how would you rate coverage generally in terms of the issues we've been talking about today by the media, and then specifically I want you to talk about the Arab media.
Well, you know, you're involved in media, you understand how it works, but you know, they have what they call the media magnifying glass that can really blow up and distort certain images, and so people see these violent looking Muslims with their contorted faces on the front cover of Newsweek, and they suddenly think that, you know, everybody in Cairo has a violent and contorted face, or wherever they are, Pakistan. And if you actually go to these places, you find, hey, it's not all rioting, and it's not all, people are just living their lives. So, you know, a few thousand people end up pretty much determining the views of millions of people about millions of other people. And so I think the media has really failed in explaining and showing people the reality on the ground. And so that media distortion, I think, does a grave disservice. And also, it also sets up the possibility of really aggressive and violent responses to a lot of what's happening. You can see, like with the ambassador killed, they didn't mention that there were Libyans who died defending the ambassador. They were just ordinary Libyans that were out there in front. You could see it on YouTube videos and things like that. So Libyans gave their lives to defend American diplomatic mission in Libya, but that wasn't pointed out. So suddenly all the Libyans are bad guys. It makes it much easier for aggressive strikes. I mean, the drone strikes that are happening, all these things, you know, are creating. The Stanford just did a study that was released a few days ago about the drone strikes and the fact that they're terrorizing civilians in Pakistan. So when you start seeing all these angry Pakistanis, you know, nobody talks about why they're angry. It's always just, it's this irrational behavior. It's about some movie that came out. No, the movie is a trigger incident. It's just the trigger for a much deeper problem, and that problem has to do with a lot of these misguided misadventures that we're having overseas.
I want to bring in our online community real quick, totally picking up on the theme that you just touched upon. I have a tweet here from Zithri Salim. He says, has the conflation of Islam and Arab culture influenced public opinion of Muslims in the West? If so, how? I also have Anika. She's waiting for us in our Google Hangout. Anika, you have a question about Islamic culture?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I did have a question that relates to a point that we were talking about a little bit ago, having to do with protests that are going on. Is there something inherent in Islam that makes people in Muslim countries kind of go up in arms every time there's something offensive? Like you were talking about Imam Zaid.
We lost her.
We just lost Hangout.
Go ahead, Imam Zaid.
Yeah, no, I think there's nothing inherent in Muslim societies that makes Muslims explode when these various stimuli occur. As Shaykh Hamza mentioned, the overwhelming majority of Muslims are going about their business trying to live dignified lives, sometimes under extremely difficult circumstances. But there are elements who are frustrated, and then these stimuli, as I mentioned earlier, they serve as triggers that bring that frustration to the surface. So I think it's very important for us to look at the underlying issues that build into that frustration.
Well, there's also something inherently, for me, is this inherent problem with that. I mean, is there something in the English psyche that makes them riot after their football team loses a match? You know, people do stupid things, you know, and so, I mean, seriously, there's violence after football games all the time in England. Is that part of the English drinking class culture? Do you know, is that what's going on? So, you know, and
this kind of goes to the bigger disconnect, though, between how the West views Muslims and how Muslims view the West.
And I think also that this idea of, you know, the idea that somehow Muslims are irrational. You know, there's a strong underlying prejudice that people have about Islamic culture. So, you know, I think we need to really get out of talking about concretizing these abstract things that we talk about, Muslims and Islam. You know, Islam in Indonesia is very different. Islam in Turkey is very different. Moroccan Islam is very different. I lived in West Africa. I've been all over the Muslim world. The safest cities I've ever been in have been in the Muslim world. I never worried about some guy, you know, walking up like I've felt in, say, New York or Washington, D.C. or somewhere else. I never felt that ever, wherever I went in the Muslim world. The thing Muslims are afraid of is their governments. Right? I mean, that's what they're afraid. Or American bombs dropping on their head, or drone strikes. Those are the things that Muslims are afraid of. They're not afraid of their next door neighbor.
Yeah, I actually have a great tweet from our online community from Bilal. I just want to quickly read this. Muslims in North America are split along ethnicity, parties, and home countries. They are not one block like Jews. So that goes to exactly what you were saying.
Exactly. We're not monolithic, you know. And I think also the Jews aren't one block either. I think that's a gross exaggeration, generalization. The Jewish community has people from Eduardo Cohen, Noam Chomsky, to, you know, Podhoretz and these right-wing people, you know, the Weekly Standard. So you get a whole spectrum in the Jewish community, and, you know, there are very liberal Jews, there are Marxist Jews, there are, you know, Zionist Jews.
Yeah, I think it's important too to introduce into this conversation that the language of us and them, this language isn't going to advance the human project at this point. It's time to redirect the language and think that we're all in this together, and it's time for our society here in the West. It's time for us to do some introspection. It's indeed terrible that 4,000 or 5,000 American soldiers lost their lives in Iraq, but it's even more terrible that over 1 million Iraqis have lost their lives due to the same set of circumstances.
Also we've got 10 suicides a day of American soldiers.
No, actually 18 a day.
Yeah, 18 a day. I mean,
so
we're
what are the
losing
universal intersections here between the Islamic message and the Christian message and the Jewish message? Where does this all converge to actually change things?
It's the human message.
It's a human message, yeah.
Right, but that's not how the world.
I mean, yeah, no, but the religious, look, first of all, you know, you've lived long enough to know that most people just want to be left alone. You know, people don't like to have their toes stepped on, you know. I once stepped on somebody's toes. Imam Zaid was with me. I almost got my head cut off, you know, because, you know, people don't like to be, you know, dissed, as they say in this culture. And when you go around denigrating people, we have laws. Almost every European nation has hate laws, you know, for freedom of speech. Like look up the Irish law of 1989 of hate speech. You know, you have we signed on to the United Nations. We have a covenant of political and civil rights. Article 20 of that covenant says that you cannot incite to hatred of race, nationality, or religion. And a lot of what's happening now is this is incitement to hatred. there are people that really have a lot invested in creating a lot of hatred. Stephen King wrote an interesting novel called Needful Things, you know, about this character that goes into a town and opens a little store, and everybody wants to buy. They go and they find exactly what they want, but he makes them do a little thing, and by the end of it, the whole town is just fighting each other, and he packs up and leaves. You know, and that's the devil's role.
Right,
whether you believe in devils, you know, these kind of spiritual beings, or just human demons, it's a demonic role to split people. I have no reason to take offense from you unless you give me reason. And I think most people are like that. But you have people out there that have, you know, just, they have agendas. There are people that make money off war. There are people that make money off weapons. These are real people out there, and we should be forewarned about them and do everything we can.
And we should be presenting an alternative
completely
message.
agreeing with you. I want to quickly bring them in. I'm so sorry to interrupt
because
you.
It just makes sense.
We have a tweet here from Warfail Oakland. He says, you both keep bringing up patience. Us from the third world have been dealing with oppression, occupation, colonization for 200 years. I also quickly want to go to Google Hangout.
We're not talking about
patience. We're going to go to Google Hangout really quickly. I'm so sorry. Hind? Oh, sorry. Actually, go ahead and finish. Shakir, I'm so sorry, sir.
No, I was saying the word patience came up once or twice in this conversation. We're talking about how we can begin to look at these problems differently. How can we introduce new parameters to frame the discussions that are going on in the world?
Responding instead of reacting. I mean, that's a different approach.
And also framing these issues in terms of human problems, so we can remove the ground from under the demagogues who capitalize on these divisions, whether they're religious, racial, or otherwise, that we're in this together.
And we have extremists on both sides, and this is a part of the problem. You know, there are extremists in this country, you know, that are articulating these visions. There's an interesting book that just came out about the Muslim tide, and what he argues in that book, he's a Guardian writer, but what he argues in there is that, you know, this guy Breivik in Finland, when he went berserk, which is, I think, a Scandinavian word. When he went berserk and killed 69 people, wounded 150, if you actually read his screed, which is 1,583 pages, it's all about Muslims taking over Europe. This thing that Bat Yaor calls Eurabia. And they've proven, and there's a TED talk that proved that Muslim demographics are dropping radically. Iran has lower birth rates than many European countries right now. So there's this whole myth of the Muslims are coming, be scared, be afraid. That used to be the Red Menace. You know, my mom grew up with the Red Menace. All right, that used to be the communists were coming. Why do we need these boogeymen when we're dealing with real problems? We have global warming. We're being told that the ice is melting on the planet. We've got fish are disappearing from the oceans. They say that in 20 years at current fishing rates, we won't have tuna fish. You just mentioned obesity problems. We've got 1 out of 4 people in this country is dying of cancer. Right? 1 out of 3 women are going to get cancer in their lifetime. Why aren't we addressing all of this human energy to the real problems of human beings and not all these artificially created problems? Because many of these problems are really artificially created.
I'm actually going to quickly go to Google Hangout. We have Hind from Chicago. You have a question for us about young Muslims. Hind, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Assalamu alaikum to the imams. Thank you for your really lively discussion. I actually agree with you that it's important for the Muslim community to take back the narrative, but my question is more around some of the work that American Muslims specifically are already doing. Many young American Muslims are already working in the inner city. I'm from Chicago, so I know a lot of the work that myself and my friends are doing, working in the city, trying to prevent violence, trying to get some healthy food in the inner city and addressing like the food desert situation. And I want to maybe get an answer from both of you. Do you think that this kind of work that a lot of American Muslims are doing, even though it's not really documented in a narrative sort of way, do you think that's an example of the maturation of the Muslim society here in the US? And then what are some of your thoughts in terms of actually sharing these stories with our neighbors? Thank you.
Well, we know like Iman, the Inner City Project, Rami Nashashibi and others that are doing, also you have violence prevention that's going on, former gang members that became Muslim that do these things. I think one of the major errors of the immigrant community was not to recognize the importance of the African American Muslim community in these inner cities. So a lot of the inner city Muslims were neglected. So you have a lot of wealth from doctors and engineers, and they failed to recognize that actually these people aren't immigrants. They're a large Muslim community that have been here for decades, and in fact you can trace it back over 100 years for some of them. So you know, these have been strategic errors and ethical errors in my estimation, but I think there are a lot of positive things happening, and certainly Chicago is one of the main hubs for some of the most positive Muslim activity in the United States, so hats off.
And I think that this is a very important sign of maturation, that you do have the wealthier suburban, more immigrant-based communities working with inner city initiatives such as in Chicago, Iman, and other efforts. We just recently had in Oakland, California, Humanitarian Day to provide school supplies and other goods to inner city children, and most of those supplies were purchased by members of the suburban communities. So you see these efforts of Muslims crossing lines that have formerly kept them apart. You see those lines being transcended, and you see a coalescing of collective action. So I think it's a sign of maturity, and it speaks for itself. We don't need orchestrated media campaigns to lend an artificial sense of just we're doing something. Let's grow organically, build a better mousetrap, and the whole world, including the media, will be the path to your door.
I actually want to quickly go over to our Google Hangout. We have Osama. You have a question to us about Zaytuna College. Osama? I think we lost Google Hangout. Oh, no, there you are. Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum to you, to Imam Zaid, and to Sheikh Hamza, and to everybody else here. I just have a quick question about Zaytuna College. I know it's not really on topic, but since you guys are still an unaccredited institution and no really educational governing body really in the world kind of recognizes the college or the degrees that it awards, how do you guys plan on maintaining Zaytuna College in terms of financially and its image within the world, to make sure that it keeps getting students and to increase its revenue and to increase its its standing?
Well, I mean, first of all, our degree is recognized by a few different universities that will accept. For instance, we just signed a memorandum of understanding with Jamiat al-Fatih in Istanbul in Turkey, that the Prime Minister's son was actually the host that evening of the event, and they will take our students in their master's and PhD programs when they graduate. We also have understanding, it's developing, but we have an understanding, and our student from a pilot program was accepted into the Graduate Theological Union, which has a joint program with UC Berkeley. So our students can go to accredited graduate schools. In terms of the sustainability...
You know what, Sheikh Hamza, I'm so sorry. We have about 30 seconds left in the program. I'd love for you to just, more philosophically than talking about the nuts and bolts of the school, wrap this up for us. Wrap up this discussion.
You know, look, I think it's good that you guys are facilitating alternative voices. I think Al Jazeera, despite the fact that, you know, some of the aspects of it are troubling in their imitation of Western media, I think it's important to have alternative voices, and I certainly think that giving opportunities for people like ourselves, we're often completely marginalized in other media outlets. I mean, I've done pre-interviews where they just say, okay, we don't want to talk to you. You know, so I want to thank you for allowing this opportunity. Support our college, please. And Imam Zaid, you can close it out.
Oh, we are out of time. But Imam Zaid and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, thank you so much for being with us. We do want to take one more minute there to give it over to Anushay with a few story leads we're following.
The University of California is awarding close to $1 million to students and alumni for police violence during a campus protest. You may recall this image of university police pepper spraying peaceful demonstrators who were protesting tuition hikes. That's public money paying the cost of brutality, tweets Parker Higgins. Our next leads from Reddit, where a forum user's attempt to embarrass a woman took an unexpected turn. A user posted this photo of a Sikh woman with the caption, "I'm not sure what to conclude from this." But user Balpreet Kaur, who identified herself as the girl from the picture, responded, "I'm not embarrassed or even humiliated by the attention that this picture is getting, because it's who I am. Yes, I'm a baptized Sikh woman with facial hair. Sikhs do not reject the body that has been given to us." Her response prompted an apology from the original poster. He wrote, "After apologizing and talking with Balpreet, I've seen how stupid this post was in the first place. It isn't funny at all." Our last lead is a new website that tracks homophobic language in real time on Twitter. Canadian university officials created nohomophobes.com as a social mirror to show prevalence of casual homophobia in society. The site tracks mentions of 4 different derogatory phrases over time. Lastly, a little red line on Iran's nuclear program drawn by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is sparking online comments. Speaking at the UN, Netanyahu took a red marker to a bomb diagram to show that he thinks Iran is close to having a nuclear capability. Netizens were quick to react, and Netanyahu's name skyrocketed to 20,000 mentions on Twitter. Many of the tweets were tongue-in-cheek. "Sorry, can't tell you what the red line is," A.V. Meyer tweets. "I can just tell you it's about 1.5 inches from the fuse on the cartoon bomb." Others thought Netanyahu's approach was effective. Omri says, "Every single article is going to be about Netanyahu drawing a red line on Iran bomb. Message managed, no?" You can find links to all those leads on Twitter, so make sure to follow us at AJ Stream. Lisa?
All right, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for joining us for this extended version of The Stream. Now on Monday, U.S. child obesity rates have tripled over the last 30 years. Will this generation of Americans be the first to live shorter lives than their parents? Tweet us your questions and your comments, or go to our website and send us your video comments. Until Monday, we'll see you online.